Yes, let's get after it. Bum, bada bada bum, bum, bada bum, ba bada ba, dum da da. Yes, and ba-dum ba, da 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 da. Welcome back, boys and girls and boys. Ba-dum ba, bum ba-da. Adventure seekers. Ba-da-dum, 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 ba-da-dum. Today we read Chapter 8 of Young Indiana Jones. And the Circle of Death. By William McCay. Set the mood. Yeah. All right. Where are we? Quickly. No, it's chapter 5. Indy was horrified to see his friend laid out like a lamb for the slaughter. Herman's clothes were torn. His hair was mussed. Tight ropes cut into his wrists and ankles, tying them together. He couldn't move a muscle or say a word. Only his eyes begged for help. But before Indy could make a move, a surprising protector stepped out of the crowd. Sir Reginald Pengrave, noble leader, brothers, think what we're about to do here. This is murder. Think. Do we really want to kill this poor boy? Some of the robed figures began to mutter. They turned toward the squire. This boy is the son of the Yankee Mueller, the Archduke boomed. What better way to celebrate our victory over those who stand in our way? His death will bring us untold power. No one will withstand our will. We will be invincible. But think, Pengrave's antagonized voice repeated. The time for thinking is done. Now is the time to act. Indy could see that the other cult members were uneasy, but no one else spoke up. It isn't right, Pengrave insisted. Is it not right to punish one who set foot on our sacred ground? Who are you to lead us? Did the sign appear to you at the warrior's mound? Show us your powers if you expect to lead. Pengrave could only look at the ground. That did it. Indy had to do something, and fast. He dashed from his hiding place, yelling as loud as he could. Do you want a spy and a fake to lead you? That's what this guy is. He's a German spy. Sir Reginald, he sent you to the warrior's mound just to get you and your family out of his way. He broke into your safe, stealing the secret Navy plans. Die, intruder, the Archduke cried, raising his hands. Fire leapt forth, making straight for Indy. Several druids around him jumped for safety. Some beat at small blazes on their robes. Yet Indy stood unhurt. The flames stopped inches from his skin. It was as if they'd hit an invisible wall. Indy felt a warmth at his forehead. He saw gleams of red, blue, and gold on the standing stones. Somehow the jewel in the circlet was protecting him. More fiery blasts leapt from the Archduke's hands, Archdruids rather, but none of them touched Indy. He just felt a little warmer. Glaring down from his rock, the Archduke suddenly remembered Herman. He raised his arms, and Indy leapt to shield his friend. Flames roared harmlessly at the back as he bent down to untie the knots. Seize the boy, shouted the Archduke, Druid rather, desperately. He spies on us, disturbs our rights. He will tell our secrets. The only spies and secrets I want to hear about are the ones concerning my home. Squire Pengrave had found his voice again, and he was angry. All lies, the Archdruid said. It's the truth, Herman shouted, the gag out of his mouth. I was at Pengrave Manor tonight. This guy and the other two came out and got me. They were talking in German about the secrets they stole from the safe. They work for the German Spy Service, pretending to be druids, made it easy for them to get the secrets from lots of people. For a second, the cult members were silent. Then, muttering, they began to close in on the Archdruid. We might want power, one man shouted, but we never thought we were selling out our country. Two black-robed figures leapt between the crowd and the cult leader. Indy recognized Ritter's face in the shadowy hood of one. Stop them, Indy yelled. They're the two who... His voice cut off as the two men whipped Luger pistols from under their robes. "You will stay where you are," Ritter said. "Yes, stand where you are, you poor idiots." The Arch Druid's voice was full of contempt. "These boys are telling the truth. We fight a secret war for Germany. And I know Germany will win when I see what fools you English are. Businessmen believed our Druid lies, didn't you, Sir Neville?" A hooded figure shrank back. "And there were army officers like General Scott." Another cult member bowed his head. "And of course politicians, like the good squire here." Reginald Pengrave's face was red with anger. "Steady on, men. We outnumber them. They can't get off more than a few shots." "But who would be the first to die?" Ritter asked. "Tricks? All tricks?" The men in the Arch Druid had called Sir Neville sounded broken-hearted. The men the Archduke had called Sir Neville sounded broken-hearted. "But the magic!" "Ah, yes, the magic was indeed real." The Arch Druid raised his hands. He gave the British leaders standing before him an evil smile. "My real name is Count Albrecht van Pappendorf, and my family has a long tradition of magic. It goes back to the Middle Ages to a great magician called Paracelsus. His name may be Latin, but his magic, that was definitely German. With my knowledge and the power slumbering in these English stones, I can do this." He began chanting. These were no-nonsense words, though. Indy recognized a few words in German, some in Latin. It grew harder and harder to hear, because the wind began to stir. It seemed as if winds were gathering, shrieking, tearing at the robes of the suddenly fearful cult members. The very air around them grew dark and cold. Then, suddenly, Indy's forehead felt warm again. The darkness rolled back. It was being driven off by a wave of multicolored light from the center of the standing stones. The jewel in the circlet was growing stronger than ever. The words seemed to pop into Indy's head. He had no idea what they meant, but he could feel the power crackle in the air as he spoke them. His hands were almost moving on their own. They made strange, intricate patterns in the air. They reminded him of the movements of the priests from his strange dream in the barrow. Somehow, the crown was lending him the powers of those long-dead wizards. Thunder rolled overhead, knocking almost everyone to the ground. But the winds died away. From the look of von Pappendorf's face, Indy's best punch couldn't have stunned him more. A rush of blood filled the false druid's face. His hands began to make sharp, stabbing gestures, ending with his fingers pointing at Indy. With a loud crackle, a blinding bolt of lightning flew from his hands toward the boy. Without knowing why, Indy raised his palms to make a circle in the air. He cried out with throat-tearing words. The bolt struck him, sparked, and ran harmlessly into the ground. Von Pappendorf began chanting madly, seeming to snatch at the air. Whirlwinds suddenly formed, charging for Indy. He could feel himself being torn in different directions. Once again, mysterious words came to his lips. They sounded almost like a lullaby. The winds died. But Van Pappendorf kept chanting, his fingers making movements like spiders. Out of the ground came a mist, which slowly drew together. There was no normal ground fog. It was black, evil. Even as it came together, wisps floated out like searching feelers. Then the strangling hands, they closed around Indy. And suddenly he couldn't breathe. He felt as if he were being squeezed to death. Gasping, Indy snapped his fingers and shouted a tongue-twisting word. The mist dissolved. Sweat ran down Van Pappendorf's face now. His voice sounded desperate as he shouted out the words of a spell. His hands were like claws as he tore at the air. 3 times he shouted a magical word, beating at the air with his arms. A loud grating noise came from above them. Indy looked up. The stone resting on 2 huge pillars started moving. It was rocking, set to tumble onto Indy and the others. Throwing out his arms, Indy shouted a word. The stone returned to its place. Von Pappendorf raised his arms again, but now Indy turned to face the wizard. He pointed his finger and said 3 sharp words. Glowing light suddenly surrounded von Pappendorf. Then it began to swirl, spinning away from him, to disappear into the stones. Von Pappendorf swayed on his feet. He seemed completely exhausted and terrified. "My powers!" he shrieked. "What have you done to my powers?" Indy took a step toward him. "Hans, Ritter!" The false druid shouted something in German, his eyes wide with fear. Ritter and his partner leapt to their feet, aiming their lugers. Indy waited for a moment to make a word of power to shout. Nothing happened. The magic had deserted him. Oh no, Indy thought. The jewel from his ancient times. It doesn't understand those guns are weapons. It doesn't know they're dangerous. Okay, time to fake it. He threw up his arms as though they were making a magic gesture. The gunman jumped back in alarm, glancing at Herman, still huddled at the German's feet. Indy nodded his head in a signal. Then he jumped for the nearest German. Herman, free of his ropes, kicked at Ritter. Indy got his under Hans's arm, forcing his gun up. The German got off a shot. His bullet whined as it chipped on one of the standing stones. Then, framed in the trilithon, behind the Germans, the sun rose. As the sunlight struck the gem on the crown he wore, Indy felt a sudden surge of heat. A searing beam of brilliance burst from the jewel. Hans screamed. He fell to the ground in a scorching heap. The crown had taken its revenge. That was the last thing Indy saw. Like everyone else who faced the sun, he was dazzled, blinded. There were sounds of wild movement around him. Then, as the world came back into focus again, he heard Pengrave's voice. "Those bloody spies are getting away." Now Indy could see, and he saw no trace of von Pappendorf or Ritter. Shouting and yelling, the British ex-Druids tore off their black robes. They dashed off into the surrounding countryside, searching for the Germans. Herman, fired up by the excitement of the movement, shouted, "Come on, Indy!" He attached himself to the group led by Sir Reginald Pengrave. The squire at last had the sense to pick up the dead German's Luger. Pengrave was the last group to leave. Pengrave's was the last group to leave, rather. Indy moved to join them, but he never made it. After 3 steps, the world started spinning around him. His vision went swimmy, and he fell to his knees. Awful, horrible pain lanced through his head. It felt as if his brain were about to burst. The circlet, he thought. It feels as if it's squeezing into my head. Indy raised frantic hands and tore off the ancient crown. His pain stopped, but he gasped in horror. The ancient bronze of the crown was turning to dust in his hands. The metal was suddenly brittle and cracked, becoming a brownish-green powder, then blew away in the breeze. As the crown extinguished, the stone it held fell from its place. No longer was it the mysterious, multicolored gem that had been magically saving the lives of everyone in the circle. Now, it was just a piece of rock. It struck one of the standing stones, bounced off, and skittered away. Indy tried to scramble after it, but when he reached the spot where the stone had landed, he couldn't tell it from dozens of other pebbles on the ground. Still on his knees, Indiana Jones shook his head. For one brief instant, he held it an incredible treasure in his hands. And now, it was gone. Woo! Bum, ba bum 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 ba bum. This has been Chapter 8 of Indiana Jones and the Circle of Death by William McCay. All right, boys and girls and boys, adventure seekers. There's still some book left. What could possibly happen? Will Indy chase down those Germans? Will he get his revenge? Or will Herman finally get up his gumption and strike his own revenge on those pesky Germans? For he is a German too, apparently, but British, and he needs to get his fellow countrymen together Let's just get after them. Could it be Herman's time? Or maybe he's still just a little piggy and he just wants some candy. Who's to say? Who's to say? But we'll get after it on Chapter 9. And we shall. Yes, we shall. I'm eager, boys and girls and boys, adventure seekers. Are you? Until next time.